Sorry, I had to ad pop up. But yeah, so on my phone, because I've got adware because I have this basically like phone farming thing that I was trying. But yeah, so so that P or J tells you, or it's to label whether the first function that other people see that you extrovert put out is a perceiving or judging function. Because if you're using the types to identify the personality of a person, it's mostly going to be in that, how are you guys identifying each other? Like, how are you viewing each other? You as a person, or, who are these other people? What do they do? So it's geared towards that, extroversion. So, in this sense. So, at this level, the extroverted types, it's a little bit easier to go ahead and label it, because it just kind of goes, like, say it's a an ENFP or something, then like the P would tell you that this is a perceiver, and the second letter are the perception functions, the sensing or intuition. So it's telling you that the E goes to that letter. With all the perceivers, that applies. And with the judgers, it's telling you that the first E, or extroversion, goes to one of the judging functions, the thinking or feeling. So then at this point you might ask something like, how is a perception not a judgment, or whatever? And this is because what you're perceiving, you're not casting a judgment on it. It's just like it's like what you're letting flow through you. Like, you're just taking it in as it is. You're just receiving the information. Okay. And so it's the light, or the darkness coming in or not coming in. So from this point, then, if you take the introverts, they're mildly confusing or a little bit more difficult, because the I is going to be first. So, and it's still telling you which one of the letters the extroversion goes to first. So that means that I, you kind of have to ignore at first, and then know that the extroversion is going to, say if it's an INFP instead, or INTP, then any type where, there's all the introverted perceiver types, that well, and introverted judger types, actually. Yeah, it's telling you that the E is going to the second letter, like the second or third letter, but the introverted function, if you were to lay it out, would come first. So, like, if you're an INFP or INTP, any of the introverts, then the introverted function is going to go first. Like, if you, as an INTP, for instance, then the introversion is there and thinking is there. So the introversion is going to go to the judging function that isn't used before the perceiving function is labeled. So it's kind of like that I is like an override to how the system normally works, if that makes sense. It's like a delay in terms of knowing what to do with them. But at the same time, it's not a delay because you're getting right to the introversion first. But, you know, in terms of simplicity, that's the way you could think about it. So, yeah. So then, you know, let's just kind of sit for a minute with that. With how, you know, if it's an INTP or, you know, any, let's say ISTJ, then it's the introversion is going to go to the sensing, and then the extroversion is going to the judging, so you know it's going to the T because it's a judging function. So then, you know, introversion, extroversion, yeah, and those two functions. Don't get this confused with thinking that, like, this is what most people use or whatever. This is just, for now, as I'm teaching it, in order for you to get a, you know, beginning grasp of just how that works. We're just like sitting with that aspect for a moment. You know, to not overcomplicate it. Now, if you think you've got that, then the way that you tell what happens with the third and fourth, because you have 4 functions that are considered main functions that you use consciously, like constantly, or which are why they're called preferred. Like if you were to describe yourself to someone, and especially if you didn't know about these other functions, you would probably say things about yourself that pertain to these 4 functions, basically. And say that you weren't the things that were the other 4. If that makes sense. So, even though you have all of them in you, because you have a unconscious mind, all these functions are, you know, we have all the functions in all of us. They just work differently and in different orders. So, yeah, this is in terms of like identifying who you are, like in this certain order. If you got me. So, so the next step is now you get into looking at the flipped side, or, you know, the functions that work in tandem with each of the functions. So, the functions of the same kind, like of the same, like, perceiving or judgment category, but that have the opposite letters for that. So, you know, if it's introverted thinking, then extroverted feeling. And, you know, opposite in terms of this flip. Later on, there's going to be a concept where there is a lot more sides to them being opposite, but in terms of understanding this model, yeah, this is how it works. So, what would happen here, like if you take an INTP, like I said, you know, and another thing is that it's the first and fourth function that work in tandem with each other in this sense, and the second and third functions that work in tandem with each other. Towards the bias of what would normally draw people into learning about their type in the first place is they feel uncomfortable with, you know, what's happening, so then they're looking for a source of comfort, you know, to feel, to know that they aren't alone, and to like, feel better about who they are as a person, and understand how they fit into the big picture and all that. Because that's important, because later on, again, when it goes into the opposites, this is going to change. But so if you laid out the function for an INTP, it would be introverted thinking, and then the second one would be extroverted intuition, and then the third one would be the flip of the extroverted intuition, so you'd have introverted sensing. And then the fourth function would be the flip of the introverted thinking, like I said, the extroverted feeling. So then that's how you get your basic, like, 4-letter type code. Alright, so that's the gist of what you need to understand the MBTI. Now, I have another model. You go over 3 models in this video. So, and the next, we have the Enneagram model. So, the Enneagram model is based off of 9 types, 9 numbers. And you can kind of think of it as versions of the MBTI type, or vice versa, think of the MBTI types as versions of the Enneagram types. But just in my mind, it seems easier to put together, to look at it, since they're numbers, and since there's less of them individually, technically, to look at it like it's, you got number 1 INTP, number 2 INTP, like different versions, even though there are some that are more common than others. There are, all the Enneagram types can be all the MBTI types, and vice versa. You might see a lot of things saying that there's kind of a bias, or there's like a certain higher percentage that one happens, and this does seem to be true, but I've seen all kinds of weird, crazy combinations that, like, you'd wouldn't think, just reading the past descriptions would go together, but they do. And that's partially because when they wrote the descriptions, they had bias in them towards, that type being like a type that's like those Enneagram types, because that was their experience with them. And that still happens a lot today when, typologists, learn about these, and they have specific experience with one aspect of it, and then they start to apply, fit all into that being the example, when really there's a lot more variability. So, the Enneagram, 9 numbers. So the idea of this, 9 basic numbers. The idea of this is there's 3 triads. So you divide the 9 into 3, and there are 3 of the types in each of the triads. The terminology here can also make it a little bit easier to memorize. Triad 3 types in each triad, and then when you multiply them, and it's 9. So then, but the triads don't, they don't simply have just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Like the first triad's 1, 2, 3, because of the reason it's arranged differently is because, I'll tell you a reason that a lot of people don't know, but one reason is the lines of integration and disintegration, like the type that you should grow to, and the type that you, when you're stressed, you move towards. And the other reason is that if you look into some math, it's actually like the Fibonacci sequence, I believe. Like it's either it just goes in the order of the Fibonacci sequence, or like you divide it and then it becomes the Fibonacci sequence. But that's yeah, that's the other thing. And so where I started with it was the thinking triad, because that's what I related to the most, like learning about like being an INTP. Simplify it for myself. It doesn't mean that that will be your main core type always necessarily, and you may even, because it's not, be drawn towards one before the others. But in my case, it just happened to be in the thinking triad, so that's where I started. And, I looked at all of them, read them, and discerned, narrowed down, but it was always the thinking triad that I was most drawn towards. Sometimes I was confused about whether I was a 9, and then I learned, hey, there's a tri-type. So you actually have a type from each of the triads. I was like, oh, that's why. It was confusing about figuring out like which one it really was. So what they are. So you've got, I'll just go ahead and do an order. It'll be simpler. So 1 is the reformer. And basically the gist is, you want to picture kind of the stereotype of like people that enforce the law. Law enforcement, I guess. But that doesn't have to be just police officers. But because the idea behind them is, and it doesn't have to always be them, but there's going to be this quality. The basic idea is they want the correct moral things to happen. And they take actions, because it's in the actions triad, towards making sure that this standard is upheld. And they prioritize this over the other two types in the action triad. Like if they had to choose in a situation, pretty much every time, between doing that or the other two, they would pick upholding that standard before the other two. And of course the healthy version of this is someone that realizes this is the case with them, and they try to uphold a standard of having no standard, not judging. So it's still the 1, but like a realized 1 would know that their way of seeing what's right and wrong isn't the only way. What's right for them isn't right for everyone, even though everyone is a part of you, like everyone's separate. So everyone's one, but we're each having our own experience as one. So, not to be confused with everyone being a 1, but everyone has the 1 qualities in them, because there's a concept called wings, but I will get to that later. So that's pretty much for instance, a 1 will, if they see someone doing something wrong, they will get, what they see is wrong, they'll get angry and, try to force this person to do what they view as the right thing. Because they see it and this person isn't doing it, and they think it's their job, or they should take it upon themselves to enforce this person definitely doing this. So yeah, when they're unhealthy, obviously, well, really, that's when you're unhealthy, that's what you'd be doing. Even when you're healthy, you can kind of have a tendency to do that, but you'd realize, they have their way too. So then the next type is we've got the 2, that is the helper. And the helper, their main concern is, and this is in the feelings triad now, their main concern is, because the 1 is the last type of the actions, and the 2 is the first one of the feelings. But yeah. The 2 is concerned with not being loved and helping other people so that they'll love them in return. And when they're at the healthiest, they'll be giving selflessly because they will have learned who to give to. Where they can still get their needs met. But when unhealthy, they would just be trying to help everyone, even the people that aren't right for them to be helping. And then also they will expect, so how that will come off to the others that are on the other end of that is this person may do something for them, and then they'll see it as they'll expect something back that they didn't even want. Or when they didn't even want the help that they gave in the first place. So there's the example that was given by, man, I really hate that I'm forgetting his name. But basically, he teaches about the Enneagram, and he's the one, when he taught about this, it really resonated with me and clicked, and I got it. And he's an actor, and he's a type 4, probably an INFP or something. And just he gave the example of them, a 2, making a cake for someone when they didn't even want it, and then expecting the person to pay for a bill or something for them in return, or pay for their part of a check or something because they made the cake earlier. But it's a problem because that person didn't even expect to receive the cake. So those type of things coming up. So that's the idea of the 2. And then the 3, they are afraid when they're unhealthy of failing. So they're overachievers, and it's called the achiever. Or, they try too hard to achieve when they're unhealthy. But when they're healthy, they just achieve. They are successful because they've figured out what works for them. Who they don't have to impress. Which you don't have to, the only person you have to impress is yourself. They kind of I don't even want to narrow it down to competition, but the being competition with yourself. It's how you see yourself and all that, not how other people see you. So that would be the 3, and the 4 is someone that really wants to be special, and I feel like I should stop it. It's a funny place to stop it. But yeah, so just so it won't get deleted.